The night air was sharp and cold, the kind that bites your cheeks and makes your fingers stiff if you leave them bare too long. High in the mountains of northern Pakistan, where the roads end and the trails begin, a young woman stepped out of her small stone house, pulling a thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Tied snugly to her back, wrapped in layers of soft cotton and wool, was her 6-month-old baby, sleeping soundly despite the hour. She hadn't planned to walk tonight, but there was no other choice. Her mother, the only adult she had left in the village while her husband worked far away in the city, had been coughing for days. At first, it was just a dry tickle in the throat, the kind that comes with the changing seasons. But by yesterday, her breathing had grown shallow and fast, her skin hot to the touch, her eyes glassy with fever. The village healer had come, boiled some herbs, and whispered prayers, but by nightfall, her mother could barely sit up. "You must go to the clinic," she'd rasped, gripping her daughter's hand with surprising strength. "Take the baby. Don't wait." The nearest health post was 12 kilometers away, down steep winding paths across dry riverbeds and through narrow gorges where the wind howled like a lost animal. There were no cars in their hamlet, no motorbikes that worked, no phone signal to call for help. Just silent stars and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. She filled a small metal flask with boiled water, tucked a packet of dried lentils into her pocket, and lit her only lantern, a dented kerosene lamp with a flickering wick. She checked the baby one last time, warm, fed, wrapped tight. Then she stepped into the dark. The first hour was the hardest. The trail dropped sharply from the village, loose stones skittering under her worn sandals. Every few steps, she paused to adjust the sling on her back, making sure the baby's head was supported. He stirred once, letting out a soft whimper, but didn't wake. She whispered to him, nonsense words, lullabies, promises that they'd be safe. Mostly, she talked to calm herself. The moon was only a sliver, offering little light. She relied on memory more than sight, her feet knowing the path even when her eyes couldn't see it. Twice she slipped on wet rock near a spring, catching herself just in time, heart pounding. Each time she held her breath, waiting to see if the baby would cry. He didn't. It was as if he understood. As the night deepened, the cold grew sharper. Her toes ached. Her shoulders burned from the baby's weight, though he was small. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Not because she was brave, she didn't feel brave at all, but because stopping wasn't an option. Back home, her mother waited, each breath weaker than the last. And here, on her back, was the future she had to protect. Somewhere past midnight, she reached the old bridge, a rickety wooden crossing over a dry ravine. In daylight, it looked shaky. At night, with the wind tugging at her shawl and the boards groaning underfoot, it felt like walking over nothing at all. She crossed slowly, eyes fixed on the planks, whispering a prayer with every step. When she reached the other side, she allowed herself a shaky breath. One more obstacle behind her. The trail leveled out after that, cutting through a stretch of pine forest. The scent of resin and damp earth filled the air. For a while, it almost felt peaceful. She thought about her husband, how he'd left 3 months ago with promises of sending money, of returning before winter. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. The post office in the next town was unreliable, and letters often vanished. Still, she held on to the hope that he was safe, working hard, thinking of them. The baby shifted again, this time letting out a tiny sigh. She stopped, leaned against a tree, and gently pulled him around to her front. His eyes fluttered open, big, dark, curious. He didn't cry, just stared at her as if checking that she was still there. She kissed his forehead, warm and soft, and smiled for the first time in hours. "We're almost there," she whispered. Just a little farther, she walked on. By 3 a.m., her legs felt like stone. Every muscle protested. Her feet were blistered, her throat dry. But the sky was beginning to change. Just a hint of gray in the east, the blackness softening at the edges. Dawn wasn't far. She passed the last checkpoint, a crooked stone marker shaped like a hand, placed there by villagers decades ago to warn travelers of the final steep climb before the valley floor. Beyond it, the land sloped gently downward. And there, nestled in the curve of the hills, she saw it, the red tin roof of the health post barely visible in the fading dark. Relief hit her like a wave. She almost stumbled, her knees weak with it, but she steadied herself, not yet. Not until they were inside. As she neared the building, a dog barked from a nearby hut. A light flickered on in a window. The world was waking up. She adjusted the baby again, now back on her back, and walked the last few 100 meters with new purpose. At the door of the clinic, she knocked softly at first, then louder when no one came. After a minute, a nurse in a wrinkled uniform opened the door, blinking in the dim light. Her eyes widened when she saw the young woman, exhausted, covered in dust, eyes red from wind and lack of sleep, but standing tall, with a sleeping child on her back. "I walked all night," she said simply. "My mother is very sick. Please, can you help?" The nurse didn't hesitate. She ushered them inside, offered a blanket, and called for the doctor. As the first golden rays of sun spilled over the eastern ridge, painting the valley in soft light, the young woman finally sat down on a wooden bench. She held her baby close, rocking gently, listening to the sound of footsteps and voices inside the clinic, real human sounds of help arriving. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. But for the first time in 2 days, she let her shoulders drop. They'd made it. Outside, the mountains stood silent as they always had. But down in the valley, a new day had begun, and with it, a chance for healing. The clinic was small, just 2 rooms, a narrow hallway, and a porch where patients sometimes waited under a rusted tin roof. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, old wood, and boiled lentils from the nurse's lunch the day before. The young woman sat on a hard wooden bench, her baby now cradled in her arms, his tiny fingers curled around hers. She hadn't let go of him since they'd stepped inside, not even when the nurse gently tried to take him so she could rest. The doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a stethoscope always around his neck, had examined her mother quickly but carefully. He listened to her chest, checked her temperature, and asked a few quiet questions. Then he nodded. "It's pneumonia," he said. "Not too late, but she needs medicine and rest. At least 3 days of treatment here, maybe more." Her heart sank. 3 days. That meant staying in the clinic, far from home, with no way to get back quickly. She glanced at her baby, then at the thin blanket covering her mother on the narrow cot in the corner. The room was quiet except for her mother's shallow breathing and the occasional cough that rattled deep in her chest. "Can I stay with her?" she asked. The nurse exchanged a look with the doctor. "There's no extra bed," the nurse said gently. "But there's a cot in the waiting room. You can sleep there. And you'll need to help give them medicine. We're short-staffed," she nodded. That was enough. As long as she could be near them, it was enough. By mid-morning, things settled into a rhythm. The nurse showed her how to mix the powdered antibiotic with water, how to time the doses, how to check for fever. She watched closely, repeating the steps in her head like a prayer. Her baby slept most of the time, wrapped in the same sling she'd carried him in through the night. When he woke, she fed him from a small bottle of formula she'd brought, just enough for 2 days. She hadn't thought she'd need more. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the dusty courtyard. A few villagers came and went, some with stomach aches, others with cuts from farming tools. No one asked her story. In these hills, hardship wasn't unusual. People carried their burdens quietly and respected others who did the same. Around noon, the nurse brought her a bowl of lentil soup and a piece of flatbread. "Eat," she said. "You won't be strong enough to care for them if you don't." She ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was plain, but it felt like a feast after the long night. As she ate, she watched her mother's face. The fever had gone down slightly. Her breathing was still labored, but not as fast. A small sign, but it felt like hope. That afternoon, she walked to the small stream behind the clinic to wash her face and rinse out the baby's cloth diapers. The water was icy, but it woke her up. She splashed some on her neck, closed her eyes, and just stood there for a moment, listening to the birds and the distant sound of a donkey braying. For the first time since leaving home, she felt a sliver of calm. Back inside, she changed the baby, gave her mother her next dose of medicine, and sat by the cot, humming softly. Her mother opened her eyes once and reached for her hand. "You shouldn't have walked alone," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "I had to," the young woman replied, squeezing her fingers. "You're all I have here." Her mother smiled faintly, then drifted back to sleep. As evening fell, the clinic grew quiet again. The nurse locked the front door and lit a kerosene lamp. She offered the young woman a thin mattress and a spare blanket for the waiting room cot. "Try to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be long too." But sleep didn't come easily. The cot was hard, the room cold. The baby stirred often, hungry or uncomfortable. Each time she sat up, fed him, rocked him, whispered reassurances. Between feedings, her mind raced. How would she get home after the treatment? The walk back would be just as hard, maybe harder with her mother weak and the baby needing constant care. And what if the medicine ran out? What if her mother got worse? She thought about the path she'd taken the night before. The steep drop near the pine forest, the shaky bridge, the loose stones that nearly made her fall. Doing it again in daylight wouldn't make it safer. And she couldn't carry both her mother and the baby. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a baby cried. Hers now quiet again in her arms. She kissed his forehead and made a silent promise. I'll find a way. I always do. Just before dawn, she finally dozed off, only to wake an hour later to the sound of her mother coughing. She rushed into the treatment room. The nurse was already there, checking her pulse. She's okay, the nurse said. Just a rough patch. The medicine is working, but it takes time. Relief washed over her, but it was thin, like morning mist that vanishes in the sun. She knew the real test was still ahead, getting them all home. As the first light crept through the clinic's small window, she stepped outside to breathe. The sky was pale pink. The mountains looked peaceful, almost kind in the soft light. She held the baby close and watched the world wake up. Farmers heading to fields, children walking to school, smoke rising from kitchen fires. For a moment, she let herself imagine it. Home. Her little stone house, the clay stove warm with tea, her mother sitting by the door watching the goats graze. Normal life, quiet life. But then she remembered there was no transport, no help coming. And today was the second day of treatment. 2 more to go. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went back inside. There was medicine to give, diapers to change, and a baby who needed her full attention. Worry wouldn't feed him. Fear wouldn't heal her mother. Only action would, so she acted. She mixed the morning dose with steady hands. She helped her mother sit up to drink it. She smiled when the baby cooed at her, even though her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She washed the small bottle in the stream again, hung the wet cloth to dry on a bush, and tucked the blanket tighter around her mother's shoulders. People passed by the clinic gate. Some nodded, some called out greetings. One old man stopped and asked if she needed anything. She shook her head politely. Allah will provide, she said. The words familiar, comforting. And for now, that was enough. But deep down, she knew. The hardest part might not be over yet. The walk had been long, yes, but getting back could be harder. Still, she wouldn't think about that now. Now there was only this moment. A sick mother breathing a little easier. A baby sleeping in her arms and a new day stretching ahead, full of small tasks that added up to survival. She sat on the bench, rocking gently, watching the sun climb higher, and for the first time in 2 days she allowed herself to believe just a little that they might actually make it through this. Morning came with a strange quietness. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. The young woman woke before sunrise, as she always did, her body trained by years of early chores and baby feedings. She sat up on the thin cot in the clinic's waiting room, her back stiff, her eyes heavy. The baby stirred beside her, wrapped in a faded blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For a moment she just watched him, letting the calm of his sleep wash over her, but the calm didn't last. As she stepped outside to wash her face at the stone basin near the clinic door, she noticed something unusual. No one was on the road. Usually by this hour, farmers would be walking toward their fields, children heading to the small school down the valley, maybe a donkey cart rattling past with sacks of grain. But today, nothing, just silence. And then, a low rumble in the distance like thunder that hadn't yet broken. She frowned, drying her face with the edge of her shawl. The sound grew louder. Not thunder. Engines. She walked to the edge of the clinic's courtyard and looked down the main road, the only road that connected this valley to the outside world. And there it was, a line of military trucks, armored jeeps, and large green vehicles stretching as far as she could see, parked bumper to bumper. Soldiers in uniform stood at intervals, some speaking into radios, others setting up metal barriers across the road. A red and white tape fluttered between 2 poles blocking the path she'd walked just 2 nights before. Her stomach dropped. She hurried back inside, heart pounding. "What's happening?" she asked the nurse, who was boiling water for tea in the small kitchen corner. The nurse glanced out the window, then sighed. "Ah, they're here." "Who?" "The convoy. A big government official is visiting the district today. Maybe even from the capital. For security, they've shut down the whole road. No one in, no one out, until they leave." The young woman stood frozen. "But I need to go home. My mother needs her medicine every day. And the baby." "I know," the nurse said gently, setting down the kettle. "But there's nothing we can do. The army doesn't ask. They just block." She stepped back outside, this time walking closer to the road. A soldier spotted her and raised a hand. "Stay back, madam. Restricted area." "I live up there," she said, pointing toward the hills. "I walked here 2 nights ago. I just need to get back with my mother and my baby." The soldier looked at her, really looked, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the baby now awake in her arms, the worn sandals, the dust still on her clothes. But he shook his head. "Orders are orders. No exceptions. The convoy stays until the official finishes his visit. Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow." She swallowed hard. Tomorrow? Her mother's medicine was only enough for today. And the baby's formula almost gone. She had no money for more. No way to call for help. No one to send word to the village. Back at the clinic, she sat on the bench, rocking the baby slowly. Her mind raced. Could she walk around the blockade? Maybe take the old goat path that wound behind the ridge? But that trail was narrow, dangerous in places, and she'd have to carry both her mother and the baby. Impossible. She looked at her mother, still resting on the cot. Her breathing was better, yes, but she was weak. She couldn't walk even a kilometer, let alone 12. And the thought of leaving her here alone while she tried to get supplies? Unthinkable. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The convoy didn't move. Soldiers came and went, some eating from metal tins, others checking their gear. A few villagers gathered near the edge of the road, murmuring among themselves. One old man tried to argue with an officer, saying he needed to get to his fields. The officer just pointed to the tape and said, "Come back tomorrow." The young woman stayed near the clinic gate, watching, waiting. Hope felt like a thin thread, fraying with every passing minute. Around midday, a military jeep pulled up near the blockade. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out. Clean-shaven, cap neatly in place, radio clipped to his belt. He spoke quickly to the soldiers, pointing at maps, giving orders. This must be the officer in charge. She hesitated. Then, clutching the baby tighter, she walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He turned, surprised. "Yes? I walked here 2 nights ago with my baby. My mother is very sick. The doctor says she must have medicine for 3 days. Today is the 2nd day, but now the road is blocked. I can't get home. And I can't stay here. There's no food for the baby, no place for my mother to rest properly." The officer studied her. Not with suspicion, but with something softer. Maybe pity, maybe just human recognition. He glanced at the baby, who blinked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "How far is your village?" he asked. 12 kilometers. "Up in the hills." He exhaled slowly. "This road is closed for high-level security. I can't just let people pass." "I'm not asking to walk through," she said quickly. "I'm asking, is there any way, any help? Even a ride back after the official leaves?" He was silent for a moment. Then he looked toward the line of vehicles. "The convoy won't move until late afternoon, maybe evening, and even then, we're not taking civilians." Her shoulders slumped. But before she could turn away, he added, "Wait here." He walked back to his jeep and spoke into his radio. She stood still, heart hammering, the baby now fussy in her arms. Was this it? Was she about to be turned away for good? Minutes later, the officer returned with another soldier, younger, carrying a medical bag. "This is Captain Rizwan," the officer said. "He's our medic. He'll check on your mother." She blinked. "You'll help?" "We can't move you today," the officer said. "But if your mother is under medical care, and you're stranded because of our operation, then it's our duty to make sure you're not left without support." Relief flooded her so suddenly she almost cried. But she held it in. Instead, she nodded, eyes shining. "Thank you, sir." Captain Rizwan followed her into the clinic. He examined her mother gently, checked her temperature, listened to her lungs. "She's improving," he said, "but she needs to finish the full course. Don't stop the medicine early." Then he turned to the young woman. "And the baby?" Is he eating well? She showed him the nearly empty formula tin. I have enough for one more feeding. Without a word, Captain Rizwan opened his medical bag and pulled out a small can of powdered milk. Military issue, meant for emergencies. This should last 2 days, he said, handing it to her. Mix it with boiled water. And here, he gave her 2 extra packets of the antibiotic, sealed and labeled, in case you can't get back for the last dose. She took them like they were gold. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he said softly. Just take care of them. Outside, the convoy remained. The road stayed blocked. But something had shifted. It wasn't freedom, but it was mercy. And in that moment, mercy felt like a lifeline. She sat back on the bench, feeding the baby with the new formula, watching the soldiers move with purpose down the road. The sun beat down hot and bright. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it had. She wasn't just a woman stranded by circumstance anymore. She was seen, heard, helped, and that made all the difference. The afternoon dragged on like a slow river, each minute stretching longer than the last. The young woman sat on the clinic bench, the baby asleep in her lap, her fingers absently tracing the rim of the new formula tin Captain Rizwan had given her. It felt solid, real, like a promise wrapped in metal. She kept glancing toward the road, where the military convoy still stood like a wall of green steel. Soldiers moved in quiet rhythm, checking tires, sharing food, adjusting gear, but no one packed up. No engine started. No signal that the blockade would lift anytime soon. Her mother dozed inside, wrapped in the clinic's only spare blanket. The extra medicine sat safely in the young woman's pocket, folded in a clean cloth. She had water. She had food for the baby. For now they were okay. But okay wasn't enough. She needed to get home. Her village wasn't just a place, it was safety, familiarity, the clay stove that warmed their nights, the neighbors who'd watch the baby if she needed to fetch water. Staying here, even with help, felt like floating in deep water with no shore in sight. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty yard, Captain Rizwan returned. He wasn't in a hurry this time. He carried 2 cups of tea in a metal tray, strong, sweet, the kind soldiers brew over open flames. He handed one to her. Drink, he said. You've been through a lot. She took it, the warmth seeping into her palms. Thank you, she said again, because words felt too small for what she owed him. He sat on the step beside her, not too close, just near enough to talk without shouting over the wind. I grew up not far from here, he said after a while. My family still lives in a village like yours. Up in the hills, no road, no phone. I know what it's like to walk for hours just to see a doctor. She looked at him then, not as a soldier, but as someone who understood. Then you know why I can't wait, she said softly. Every day away from home, it's harder for them. For me, he nodded. The convoy is supposed to leave by sunset. The official finished his meetings early, but there's a problem, a landslide farther down the road. They're clearing it now. Could take a few more hours. Her heart sank again, but not as deeply this time. There was a reason. A timeline. Not just silence. Even after they clear it, he continued, the road will be rough. And your mother. She can't walk. No, she admitted. She can barely stand. He was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea. Then he said, I spoke to my commanding officer again. I told him your story. I showed him the medicine, the baby's age, how far you walked. He paused. He agreed. If the convoy moves out tonight, we can give you and your family a ride back in one of the support jeeps. Just past the blockade, all the way to the foot of your village trail. She stared at him, eyes wide. Really? It's not guaranteed, he said quickly. Only if the road is clear and if we have an empty vehicle. But I'll make sure it happens. I'll stay until you're on your way. Tears welled up, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help. But hope she let in. It filled her chest like warm air. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked out toward the mountains where the last light painted the peaks gold. Because once my mother walked all night with my little sister when she had a fever. No one helped them. They made it, but it took weeks for my sister to recover fully. He turned back to her. If I can make sure someone else doesn't have to go through that alone, then my uniform means something. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and drank her tea and held her baby a little tighter. As evening fell, the camp began to stir. Tents were folded. Radios crackled with updates. The landslide had been cleared, narrow but passable. The convoy would roll out in 1 hour. Captain Rizwan stayed true to his word. He brought a stretcher from the medical jeep and helped the nurse gently move her mother onto it. The old woman was weak but alert, her eyes sharp with gratitude. "Allah bless you," she whispered to the young soldier. "Rest now, Auntie," he said kindly. "We'll have you home before the stars are bright." The young woman packed their few things, the empty lantern, the shawl, the medicine, the formula tin. She wrapped the baby securely in the sling, front this time so she could keep him close and steady during the ride. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was about to. At dusk, a green military jeep pulled up to the clinic gate. It wasn't fancy, just a rugged vehicle with canvas seats and mud on the wheels. But to her it looked like salvation. 2 soldiers helped lift the stretcher into the back, securing it with straps. Captain Rizwan held the door open for her. "Sit here," he said, pointing to the front passenger seat. Safer for the baby. She climbed in, heart pounding. The engine rumbled to life, a deep, steady sound that felt like movement, like progress. As they drove past the checkpoint, the red and white tape fluttering behind them, she looked back at the clinic, the place that had been both refuge and prison over the past 2 days. She wouldn't forget it, but she wouldn't miss it either. The road was bumpy, full of fresh potholes from the landslide, but the driver took it slow. Her mother lay still in the back, eyes closed but breathing easy. The baby slept against her chest, lulled by the motion. Outside, the valley turned from orange to deep blue. Fireflies blinked in the fields. Goats called to each other from distant slopes. Captain Rizwan didn't talk much during the ride. Just checked on her mother once, offered water, made sure the baby was covered from the evening chill. But his presence was calm, steady, like a hand on a shaky shoulder. When they reached the base of the trail that led up to her village, the jeep stopped. "This is as far as we go," he said. "The path is too narrow for vehicles." She nodded. She knew this part. This was where her walk had begun, but this time she wasn't alone. The soldiers helped carry her mother down the short slope to the trailhead, setting the stretcher gently on flat ground. One of them even tied a small bundle to the stretcher frame, bread, dried fruit, and another tin of formula. "From the unit," the soldier said with a shy smile. Captain Rizwan handed her a small flashlight. "For the path," he said. "And if you ever need help, tell the village elder to send word to the district post. Ask for me." She looked at him, this stranger who had become a lifeline, and for the first time she smiled. A real, full smile that reached her eyes. "I won't forget you," she said. "I hope you never have to," he replied. Then with a final nod, he got back into the jeep. The engine started again and the vehicle turned, its headlights cutting through the dark as it drove back toward the main road. She stood there for a moment, listening to the sound fade. Then she took a deep breath, adjusted the baby on her chest, and knelt beside her mother. "We're home soon," she whispered. Her mother reached for her hand. "You carried us both," she said softly. "Now let the village carry you." And with that, under a sky full of stars, the young woman began the last leg of her journey, not in fear, not in desperation, but with quiet strength. A sleeping child on her heart, and the steady presence of her mother beside her, carried not just by her hands, but by the kindness of others who chose to see her. The walk up the final stretch to the village felt different this time, not because the path was easier, it was just as steep, just as rocky, but because the weight on her shoulders wasn't only physical anymore. It was lighter in a way she couldn't explain. The baby slept against her chest, warm and steady. Her mother, though weak, was alert, resting on the stretcher 2 village men had come down to carry when they saw the headlights in the valley. Word had traveled fast. Someone had spotted the military jeep, and soon half the hamlet was waiting near the trailhead with lanterns and blankets. Hands reached out before she even made it to the first house. A neighbor took the stretcher. Another wrapped a thick wool shawl around her mother's shoulders. An elder woman scooped the baby gently from her arms, cooing softly, giving her a moment to stretch her aching back. No one asked for details. They just helped. In small villages like this, you didn't need to explain hardship. Everyone knew it by the lines on your face, the dust on your clothes, the quiet in your eyes. By the time they reached her stone house, A fire was already lit in the clay stove. Someone had swept the floor. Another had left a pot of warm milk and fresh bread by the door. She helped her mother onto the sleeping mat, propped her up with pillows, and gave her the last dose of medicine with careful hands. Outside, the night was quiet except for the soft lowing of goats and the distant call of an owl. But inside, for the first time in days, there was peace. Over the next week, her mother grew stronger. The cough faded. Her appetite returned. She sat by the door each afternoon, watching the baby crawl on the packed earth floor, laughing when he grabbed at her shawl. The young woman tended to the goats, fetched water, cooked simple meals, but now neighbors dropped by often, bringing lentils, dried apricots, or just company. No one said it outright, but they all knew what she'd done, and they honored it in the only way their world allowed, through quiet acts of care. Then, something unexpected happened. A government van arrived in the village one morning, not military, but painted white with a red cross on the side. 2 health workers stepped out, carrying boxes of medicine, a small refrigerator for vaccines, and a satellite phone wrapped in foam. They gathered the villagers under the old walnut tree and made an announcement. Starting next month, a mobile health unit would visit every 2 weeks. A trained nurse would come, bring medicine, check on children and elders, and even help with emergencies. And that phone? It would stay with the village elder. Anyone could use it to call for help. People murmured in surprise. This had never happened before. After the meeting, the young woman hung back. One of the health workers approached her. "We heard what you did," she said gently. "Walking all night with your baby to save your mother, and then getting blocked by the convoy," someone from the district office told our team. They said it opened eyes. The young woman didn't know what to say. She hadn't done it for recognition. She'd done it because there was no other choice. But now, because of it, her whole village would have a lifeline. Weeks turned into months. Winter came, wrapping the mountains in snow. But the mobile clinic still came, braving icy roads, sometimes on foot when the van couldn't pass. The satellite phone was used twice, once for a child with a high fever, once for an old man who'd fallen. Both times, help arrived faster than anyone could have imagined a year before. The baby grew. He took his first steps near the goat pen. He laughed at the sound of wind chimes made from old tin cans. He clung to his mother's shawl when strangers came, but grinned when the nurse from the mobile clinic showed up with sweets and a stethoscope. Years later, when he started school in the small building down the valley, his teacher told a story during morning assembly, not a fairy tale, but a true one. "There was a mother," she said to the circle of wide-eyed children, "who walked through the darkest night with her baby on her back, just to save her own mother. And when the road was blocked the next day, kind hearts made a way." The boy sat up straighter. He knew that story. His mother had told it to him many times, not as something heroic, but as something ordinary people do when love is stronger than fear. At home that evening, he asked her, "Was that really you, Ami?" She stirred the lentil pot over the fire and smiled. "It was just walking," she said. "Anyone would have done it, but no one else did," he replied, with the certainty only a child can have. She looked at him then, his bright eyes, his small hands already rough from helping with chores, and saw not just her son, but the future of this village. A future where walking all night might not be necessary anymore, where help could come before the worst happened, where a blocked road wouldn't mean being forgotten. She didn't speak of it often, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd take out the small flashlight Captain Rizwan had given her. It still worked, though the batteries had been replaced twice. She kept it in a wooden box with the empty formula tin and the red cloth that had held the medicine, not as trophies but as reminders. Reminders that even in the hardest moments people can choose kindness. That a soldier can see a mother and not just a civilian. That a blocked road can become a bridge if someone is willing to look beyond orders. And that one person's desperate walk can ripple outward, changing more lives than they ever imagined. Life in the village didn't become easy. The winters were still harsh. The nearest hospital was still hours away. But something had shifted, not in the land but in the people. They looked out for each other more. They spoke up when someone was sick. They saved coins in a shared jar for emergencies. And when a young woman in the next hamlet went into early labor during a storm, 3 men from this village walked through the rain to carry her to the road, knowing now that someone would be waiting with a van. The young woman never sought praise. She didn't go to meetings or give speeches. She simply lived, cooking, caring, teaching her son to be gentle with animals and honest with words. But her story lived too. Not in newspapers or videos, but in the way neighbors paused at each other's doors, in the extra blanket offered on cold nights, in the shared belief that no one should have to walk alone through the dark. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right and the valley was quiet, you could almost hear the echo of footsteps on the mountain path, steady, determined, full of love. Not just hers, but all those who followed, because she showed them it was possible to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed blocked. Years had passed since that night walk through the mountains, the one that began in desperation and ended in quiet change. The baby who once slept in a sling against his mother's back was now a boy of 10, tall for his age, with calloused feet from running barefoot on stone paths and eyes that noticed everything. He still carried the same quiet curiosity, but now it was paired with a sense of responsibility that surprised even the village elders. The village itself had changed too, not all at once, but slowly, like water shaping rock. The mobile health unit came every fortnight without fail. The satellite phone, once a rare marvel, now sat on a small wooden shelf in the elder's house, its battery kept charged by a small solar panel donated by a visiting aid group. Children no longer walked 5 kilometers just to report a fever. Medicine arrived before the worst set in, and when a young girl broke her arm falling from an apricot tree last spring, help came within hours, not days. But the real change wasn't in things. It was in people. One afternoon, as the boy helped his mother mend a goat pen, a stranger arrived at the edge of the village. He wore city clothes, clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and shoes that hadn't touched mud in weeks. He carried a small bag and looked around with the cautious eyes of someone used to noise and crowds, not silence and stars. The boy noticed him first. "Ami," he said quietly, "there's someone new." His mother looked up from her work. She wiped her hands on her shawl and walked toward the path. The stranger saw her and stopped. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Two people bound by a moment neither had planned but both remembered. Then he smiled. "You probably don't remember me," he said. But she did. It was Captain Rizwan. He wasn't in uniform anymore. He wore the simple clothes of a civilian and there was more gray in his hair, but his eyes were the same. Steady, kind. He'd left the army 2 years ago, he explained, and now worked with a small nonprofit that helped remote communities get better access to healthcare and communication. He'd been assigned to this district again, and when he saw the village name on the list, he asked to come himself. "I wanted to see how you were," he said simply, "and if things got better." She didn't say much at first, just nodded, then gestured toward their home. "Come, have tea." Inside, the room was warm from the stove. The boy watched from the doorway as his mother served tea in chipped cups, the same ones she'd used for years. Captain Rizwan sat on the floor like any guest, not like someone important. He asked about her mother. She was still alive, though slower now, spending her days weaving small rugs and telling stories to the grandchildren of neighbors. "And him?" Captain Rizwan nodded toward the boy who hovered near the clay water jug. "He remembers your story," she said, glancing at her son with a soft smile. "He tells it to his friends like it's a legend." The boy stepped forward then. "You gave us the flashlight," he said. "We still have it." Captain Rizwan looked surprised. "You kept it?" "It works," the boy said proudly. "I changed the batteries last month." Later, as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, the three of them walked to the edge of the village, where the trail began, the same path she'd taken all those years ago. The boy ran ahead, kicking up dust, while the two adults walked slowly behind. "You know," Captain Rizwan said after a while, "that day changed me too. I'd followed orders my whole career. But seeing you, exhausted, determined, carrying your whole world on your back, it made me realize that rules mean nothing if they forget people." She nodded. "And now you help others like me." "Not just me," he said. "Your story reached farther than you think. That district officer, the one who approved our request to give you a ride, he started a small fund for emergency transport in remote areas. It's not big, but it saved lives." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the boy balance on a narrow rock wall, arms out like a bird. "I never wanted to be a story," she said quietly. "I just wanted my mother to live." "That's why it mattered," he replied. because it wasn't about being seen. It was about doing what was right even when no one was watching. As evening settled, Captain Rizwan prepared to leave. He wouldn't stay the night. He had to reach the district town before dark.